Welcome to the Pilot Tribe Network.
My father murdered my mom. And from that moment on, my life was shattered.
You're listening to Keep Living with Marva Hanks.
So this is Marva Hanks with Just Keep Living, and I get to kick off my first podcast show with one of my dearest friends in the world, Miss Jolene Swaine. Thanks for coming to the show, Miss Jo.
Thanks for inviting me, Mrs. Marva.
Well, Just Keep Living is going to be about the people that I have known in my life that have overcome tremendous circumstances and challenges, and I couldn't be more honored than to have you on the show, knowing your story since we met. And so, Jo, I met when I was sitting in the salon chair looking at her portfolio of her artwork that she did in homes, and my dream was to earn enough money to be able to hire Miss Jo as an artist to perform her craft in my home. So God allowed that to happen. He got a second contract with the NFL, and I was able to approach Miss Jo and commission her to do work in my home. So welcome, Miss Jo, and thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Miss Jo, one of the wonderful things that we have in common that were so unexpected to me, along with the love of your work, was that we have a background that coordinates back to Iowa. Tell me about that.
Yes, I was born in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and Merton and Marva met at the University of Iowa. Merton said he didn't think it was too many black people in Iowa. It wasn't at that time. But my mom died when I was 7 years old, 1955. My father murdered my mom. And from that moment on, my life was shattered.
So, Miss Jo, I've had the pleasure of you sharing this story before with a public audience. And because we're on podcast, we don't have the pictures, but there's a very strong, poignant picture. In 1955, you were 7 years old. You were not by yourself. How many siblings were in your family?
At that time, I had 2 sisters and 5 brothers, 7, and I am the oldest one. This happened August 27, 1955. My father came over to visit, and he asked me where my mother was, and I told him she was on the back porch. He proceeded to go to the back, and the incident happened so fast. My mother was only 22 years old. She ran across the street, and I ran behind her, and I knelt down, and my mother laid there in a puddle of blood. I did not know at that time, at 7 years old, it was my first encounter with death. I asked the person at the gas station what was happening, and he picked me up and he said, "Your mom has gone to heaven." From that moment on, my life was shattered. I was taken away from my brothers and my sisters. I went to Tennessee to live with my grandmother on my father's side. This was when there was a lot of prejudice at that time. Rosa Parks had just sat on the bus. I had never encountered prejudice at all. It wasn't that way in Iowa. But in Jackson, Tennessee, the deep south, they had the signs up, colored, and I was not aware. I went to a water fountain to drink some water. When I came up from drinking the water, my grandmother slapped me. She said, "What are you doing drinking out of the water fountain?" She said, "You can end up dead. You see this sign? You never drink out of any place or go anywhere when it says white only. That was a rude awakening for me. That really broke my spirit.
Well, if I could take a pause there, as you are doing a good job with your emotional self-control and your physical self-control, and just knowing what that had to be like as a 7-year-old, that to know that your father was coming to visit, so he wasn't living in the home, and so there was regular abuse, I would say. Am I wrong in assuming that? Or if he wasn't in the home regularly, why was he not in the home, and why was this a visit?
It was a visit. He came on the weekends to pick me up. And in those days, there was a lot of drinking, a lot of gambling going on. I saw more than any 7-year-old should ever see. I was very caring. I was more like a little mother. I took care of my brothers and my sisters, my mom, my dad. They did a lot of partying. And I felt like it's always been my calling. I love children. I love caring. I'm very passionate about it. And my dad, when he would come over and take me downtown, and he exposed me to gambling, drinking, all the things that a little 7-year-old, and even before that, shouldn't see. My father was very jealous of my mom, and in those days, it was like the man owned the woman. My mother's best friend told me later on that they had called the police and said, my father's name is Joseph, and they call him Joe. Joe had threatened to kill my mom, and in 1955 the police said there's nothing we can do. That is his wife. That is his property.
And so that's so hurtful. And for those that are listening, I would say, just because I've witnessed how you've overcome and persevered those kind of traumatic memories, to move forward and just be so loving, create such the loving fantasy environments that you have done for kids. That was one of the reasons I wanted to hire your artistic craft for my own household, for my own, little girls at the time, that you would transform. It seems to me like, and I could be offbeat, that you recreate such wonderful, fantastical environments for other kids, because yours was so traumatic at that time in your life, even before you went to Tennessee, and then add on the secret sauce of exposure to racism to it.
Yes, one of the things too in Tennessee, my grandmother, her generation, and she always said a child should be seen and not heard. So I didn't have a voice, and I learned very early living with her. In fact, the first day I went to live with her, it seems like a dream, but there's certain things you just can't make up, because I can't even imagine, as much as I love my grandkids, that this is even possible. But the first day I went to live with her, she made a big pot of beans, and her rules were, eat it or else. I said, I don't like beans. And my mom, she was a young spirit, so if we wanted peanut butter and jelly, if we wanted to eat beans, whatever, my mom let us do basically what we wanted to do. And my grandmother said, no, eat the beans or else. And then after all the beans were gone, she'd make like a big pot of greens. Eat that or else, or basically starve. So I didn't know her rules. The very first day, I jumped up on the counter, a little 7-year-old with my little bony legs, and I went to make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She came in the kitchen, she hit me in the back of my knees. I went down, broke my front tooth, blood went everywhere. I was screaming and crying. I had been taken away from all my brothers and sisters. I learned right then the abuse My mother was totally the opposite. Loving, passionate, kind, a young spirit. I learned from that day on, and it shaped me. For good, for bad. It shaped me in a way where it took me being myself, my personality away. I basically turned to be a doormat because I didn't want to do anything to ever upset her.
So not even being able to express your voice just in satisfying the desires of an appetite. You didn't want to express that you wanted peanut butter and jelly over beans, or tell me about your sleeping condition. So there's just a whole lot that I would just have a question about, even how you transported a 7-year-old from Iowa to Tennessee. How did you even get there? Do you remember? Were you bused there? Did somebody come and pick you up? There had to be a court case involved.
Yes, it was a court case. Her and my aunt Ophelia. Ophelia was a year older than my mom. She was 23, and at that time my grandmother was 52. And real old, gnarly, mean 52-year-old. And they came to the court, and my grandmother told me later that, of course, my mother's sisters, everybody, they didn't welcome them in their home because her brother, my grandmother's son, had taken my mom's life. So they came and got me, and we went on the train to Tennessee. And one of the things that really stood out to me is, why didn't my brothers and sisters come with me? Mm-hmm. They said that I was my father's only child, but through a lot of ignorance in those days, they said they took me because I was the light-skinned one. And I cannot deal with that kind of concept, even as a race today, how our own race depicts because of color. But that's the way it was.
So thanks. I wasn't expecting that commentary on the class system within the black culture. So you overcome that, and so that wasn't seen as you still got no special treatment because of the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. Even within your own family, you still experienced abuse.
And the thing is, they didn't allow me to have any contact with my brothers and sisters. My grandmother absolutely made me write my father at least 2-3 times a week. She made me put in that letter that I loved him. I was a very smart kid, and I didn't want to put that part, I love you, but I had to because of my survival instinct. Mm-hmm. And he would send me leather purses, and I hated them. And she would make me carry the purses to church, and I had to, because once she put that fear in me, I felt like she was only maybe at the most 5 feet tall or shorter. But as a child, I thought she was at least 6 feet tall. I was just totally afraid of the woman. And whatever she said, I did. And like I said, that made me a person who later in years became a people pleaser. It destroyed my independence. My mother, she let me be independent. She called me little mama. I was in charge of my brothers and my sisters. I was taken away from a home of love and caring. And as awful as what my father did, I have to say he was a caring and loving person to me too. He always called me his little sugar doll, baby doll, sugar plum. And I went to this family who just didn't love me.
And so how long did you stay in your grandmother's house? Until what age?
I was with my grandmother from 7 to 17. I got pregnant, and I think subconsciously that was a way to get away from home. Mm-hmm. and I came to California with my aunt Ophia. And at that time, I had my firstborn, Wanda, when I was 17. And I made my own way. I called my grandmother one time and asked her, could I come back home? And her response was, do you have a roof over your head? Yes. Are you hungry? No. Then make it work. So that's what I did.
And you did.
One of the titles Oprah has for one of her shows is Where Are They Now? And that is the separation of my brothers and sisters. When you hear things on the news, we as a society, we listen to the news and we just kind of brush things under the rug. And as a child, we were separated. I didn't meet my brothers and sisters for 35 years after my mom died. All of us took a different path in life. I have 2 brothers. They have passed on at the age of 61, both of them. They were into heavy drugs. My brother, who's 13 months younger than me, he basically never got over the death of our mother. His name is Randy. My other brother, Herman, I think he's the 5th child. He did a lot of drugs. I have another brother who's a pastor of a church, and he's still in Iowa. My other brother, he's a karate instructor. He plays at least 6 or 7 instruments, Stevie, in some of the jazz bands in Iowa. I have a sister who's in Colorado. I have another sister who endured, I think, more abuse than I did. She says that it's not that we're having a matching contest or anything like that, but she thinks that I endured more abuse than she did. She was taken to her father. He was a bus driver. He met my mom. My mom was called the Black Marilyn Monroe of her days, which is, I think, one of the reasons her life was ended so short. My father was super jealous of her, and she was very loving, hugging, touching people. And in those days, you just didn't do that. And he came from a family who were totally the opposite. My sister, when she went to Minnesota to live with her father and her stepmother, my mother had me at 14. My sister had her first child at 14. She endured some of the most unthinkable things. And that's what I'm saying, that people don't stay in contact with the kids who are separated, who go to foster homes, that are abused. This happened to us. And I asked my father when I met him, did you ever think of your action, what happened to the 7 kids, all of us? He said, no. He said, I met your mom when she was 13, and I felt like I was her father, I was her husband, and that's just the way it was, baby girl, in those days. He said, he did 10 years. He said, I have asked God to forgive me more times than you could ever think about it. And he said, I can't go back and redo or undo anything that happened. So what I'm saying is, through that one action of my mother dying and us being separated, we as children, we lived a living hell.
Yeah, most human beings don't understand the full consequences of their sinful actions. And I say it over and over, sin is not self-contained. When one person's behavior impacts another, there is an unintentional ripple effect, and in the most harmful ways.
You're listening to Just Keep Living with Marva Hanks.
We do sponsor other nonprofits, Zoe's Place is a wonderful foster care program when kids age out of foster care and there's a gap, a need for families to fill the gap. When you aged out and you're no longer in the system, that there's still a need for these kids to be cared for and to have homes and families and things like that. So one of the things that our podcast does, any proceeds that are raised, is that we do help sponsor Zoe's Place, is a foster care home here, one of the foster care homes here in Denton County in Texas. But I'm glad you brought that up and make that a very good point.
I just want to say one thing too, that we as human beings, I feel like growing up, I used to look up and ask God why, of course, and I feel like if I had some adult in my life, a mentor, someone I could go and talk to. Kids need that. When you find kids that have been abused, sometimes just having that person to come and just hold you, just to love on you, it means everything. And I did have, thank God, some people in the church. One lady named Sister Tyson, she looked at me one day and she said, "You're not going to be a child always." And that gave me strength. She held me and didn't say a word, but I felt her love going through me. And there were some people in church. We went to Seventh-day Adventist Church on Saturdays, and they gave me strength to believe that there's a God, and just pray and know that it's all in His hands.
So when you encounter kids, and I know that you have an affinity for young kids and they're drawn to you like a Pied Piper, what is the one thing you make sure you say over and over again to children?
Have faith, believe, and trust God. That's the main thing. That is one of my number one key words, trust. Mm-hmm. And in that word trust is us. Mm-hmm. Us, we as the human race, we can do so much for each other. Loving and being there for each other. I feel like that's my purpose in life. Mm-hmm. I love children. The first time I met you, Milan literally jumped out of your arms to come to me. Her spirit, I just felt it. It was just so sweet. Where Miss Maya was always independent and on her own. You know, she would be there with me to basically help me take care of the household when you guys were.
Maya is a boss.
Yes, yeah, that is who she is. And I love that about her. You know, and that's the way I was before I was snatched up and taken to Tennessee. And then everything was taken away from me, I feel like, because I went at the time and era when we were fighting as blacks for the civil rights, the Martin Luther King and all that.
So you can see that there's, before we do the greater movement in our community, is that we just start at home. Just look around and see who we can love on that's in close proximity to us.
Yes.
And practice at home.
Yes, I learned a lot from you, being in your home so much, of how you are with your girls, with your husband, with your patients. And the thing that I always loved is when you and I would sit later at night and talk, and how you respected my opinion. You nor Merton ever made me feel small. You never belittled me, you know, because my grandmother took so much self-esteem from me that I always thought I was dumb, I was stupid. You know, one of the things that she would say to me is, all you're going to do is have a bunch of babies and be on welfare. That's it, you know? And from just the people going into the different homes, like you said, I've worked for some of the most elite people in the Bay Area, and just watching them, the way they live every day, and the respect that the husbands have for their wives. I didn't even know that existed. To be kind to each other. I had Nancy Freckles, a mutual friend of ours. I asked her husband one time, I said, if you had to do it again in your life, I said, would you marry this woman? He said, I will marry her in this life, the next life, and the next life.
Yeah, they're a special couple. Gary and Nancy Fretkins are friends of ours to this day.
And they're not phony.
No. So what do you want your legacy to be for your tribe?
I like that. The tribe, the village, I say the community. I just want my kids and all the kids that I've dealt with in life to know that love is the strongest power we have. And if we treat each other with respect and joy, that everything else in life, and let God show us the pathway, everything else will fall in place.
Just as King Solomon was privy to the behavior and mistakes that his father, King David, made, and in his prayer was that he was so grateful for all he had learned in God's faithfulness to King David, that he, as a young king and as a young boy, could learn from the life lessons and mistakes from his father and mother. And that is our greatest legacy, is our stories that we have to leave for our next generation. So we thank you for that, and this being the beginnings of that, getting your story down on record.
Our stories, our memories. When a person dies, that's all you have, is their memories. And one of the things, like I said, when you're a child and you're growing up, you don't understand. I mean, there were a few times where I literally thought I was crazy. And now that I'm older and I look back, I understand what God has in plan for me. And that is to be the best person I can be, and to be there for my kids, my extended family, and all those people, you know, for my light to shine over them. That you can overcome, no matter how bad the situation is, you can overcome it.
And I agree, and with that, that's going to be the end of this podcast of Just Keep Living. It gets better. Take it one breath at a time, one day at a time, and hang on. God totally knows what He is capable of doing in you and in me. So thanks, Miss Jo. I appreciate it. Everyone at some point in their lives will have to settle the matter of disappointment, whether in people or circumstances. Choose to receive His grace to influence your next step. This is Marva on Just Keep Living.
Sign up and be a part of the team. Be a Pototron at Pototron.com. Thank you for listening to Pototron.